Come on in, bestie. Welcome to Story Pod, where we do the doing of story development together. Brought to you by Creative BFF. Hello, and thank you for joining me again for the Story Pod podcast. My name is Ashley, and I am so glad you're here. Because listen, I have another little petty pet peeve that I want to discuss. And if you caught my first pet peeve podcast, then you will know that this series was kind of pushed forward in my world because I was scanning Reddit writer subs for questions to answer. Side note, if you have a question about your story that you would like me to answer on my podcast, would you please feel free, because I would love to do that, feel free to either email me at ash@creativebff.com, or you can go to my website, creativebff.com, and throw a contact form and put your question there, and I would love to answer it. But anyway, so I was going through Reddit. I saw a post, a very simple post that asked, what are your pet peeves? And I have another one for you. I had written a good sized list of pet peeves, but this one, I wasn't planning on recording another episode of it just yet. But as of recording of this episode, I have been reading a book in one of my favorite little genres, my little guilty pleasure genres, when I'm just reading for my own pleasure, which is generally most of the time. Okay, listen, let's be real. Okay. And the genre is basically Pride and Prejudice fan fiction novels. And while I have generally enjoyed this particular author's work, I did notice that it seemed like the central conflict of the story basically exemplified the pet peeve that I'm going to talk about today, which is conflict, especially in relationships, that can be solved by a simple conversation. So a conflict that surrounds a misunderstanding. And I will say up front, first and foremost, that it's not terribly bothering me. It's not like intensely bothering me in this particular novel because it is rather short. So it makes sense. Okay, it's like, all right, well, I will let you slide. Overall, I'm enjoying it. I'll let you slide on this one because you're not making me, slog through and wait for 80% of the book to be up before you resolve this very simple misunderstanding. But in longer books, to have to put up with that is just, it can become unbearable. And I think it's because I am a rational adult. Maybe if I was a teenager, a preteen, reading a young adult romance novel or something, maybe I wouldn't have a problem with it because, everything is so angsty and emotional at that age. But now, as a rational adult who sees the benefit of just being able to have normal conversations with people, the fact that you're making me sit through these two people who really, if they just sat down and said, okay, listen, let's just talk about this. What happened here in this situation? Because maybe I'm not catching something. Maybe I've missed something. Can we try to come to an understanding about what's going on here so at least we can be on the same page of our frustration, hatred, dislike of each other that is actually it's actually covering the fact that we love each other. Now I do realize because I feel like this happens mainly in romance novels. And I will say this, just as a little preview, I do have, now that I'm thinking about it, I do have another pet peeve that I feel like is kind of in the same family, but it happens more so in novels or books that have more action going on, that are more of a hero's journey, like a pure, clear hero's journey. But I understand that in romance novels, it's a very easy form of conflict to use. And I'm not saying never use it. Okay, I think there's because, in real life, and I say that with hesitation because I don't necessarily think that in writing, everything should 100% mirror the sloppiness of real life. I think that can make a story less enjoyable. But I do understand that in real life, we do have conflicts with people that would just be resolved if we could have a clear-headed, calm conversation with each other, just hear each other's points. Maybe we won't agree on the situation, but at least we will be clear on why we disagree, right? So I can understand how in a format, a book, where relationship is the main focus and goal and desire, that this would be a very easy form of conflict to employ. Because it is so easy, I feel like it's very much low-hanging fruit in this type of, in this genre. It's a very low-hanging fruit type of conflict that if you use it, I would say do not let that be the conflict that drags on for the whole book. That is very, now this may again be a stylistic thing. So you let me know, a stylistic preference rather, you let me know, dear listener, if you agree with this or if you disagree, or if you just, I never thought about it, or if you love it, if you love that and it just like, oh, this is my favorite part of these types of books, this never-ending conflict that could so easily be resolved by a conversation. Let me know, and let me know why. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about that. In any case, I find that if the central conflict, or if all of the conflict or a lot of the conflict revolves around misunderstandings that actually the reader knows would be like, all you guys got to do is talk. You guys are actually, you guys don't know the other side. So if you just talk, then you'll at least know that you had a misapprehension regarding that situation. I don't even know if I use that word right. And if all of the conflict or a lot of the conflict is around these very cheap kind of low-hanging fruit conflicts, I just used the conflict way too many times, then to me, when I'm reading, it not only frustrates me, it annoys me, it makes me want to put the book down, but it also begins to, I hate saying it like this, but like cheapen the book a little bit, cheapen the quality of the writing a little bit, because I feel like as a writer, part of the duty of the writer is to come up with clever, intelligent conflict that's actually conflict. Make it hard. If this is what you're doing. Now, in romance, this may not super apply, or there will be different types of conflict that could be seen as make it super hard. But make it really hard on your protagonist to achieve their goal. And that requires you to put in work as the author to think of, okay, now both me and the character are backed into a corner. How am I going to get us out of this? How am I going to write our way out of this problem that I have created, that the antagonist has us on the ropes, And that's very, very interesting. And I will say, as a writer, just on a pure enjoyment as a writer, it's very, very satisfying to be able to finally think your way out of the issue that you created, this impossible situation. There's no way that the character can, resolve this particular conflict. But when you think of the way, it's just like it's like, oh man, that the feeling of excitement that at least I get as a writer when I have figured it out, or as a story coach when I'm helping somebody like, ooh, here's what you could do. And it's like that light bulb moment, it's so satisfying. And it's also very satisfying as a reader to be like, ooh, that was clever. I didn't see that coming. But I do think that if you're going to do that as a writer, then it does require you to pre-plan, which I think most writers don't have a problem. There are some people, I'm sure, who like to just work straight ahead, like just write, and this is the final draft. I'm just writing whatever happens. I don't like to plan. I don't like to do structure. But this is one of the benefits, I think, one of the many benefits of doing pre-planning, really being thoughtful about doing the work before you start writing the story in earnest, because it allows you to, as you work through the structure and the plot, it allows you to then go back and, if necessary, add like a smoking gun earlier in the story that will help you. So now it's like, for example, not for example, but like the analogy being like, all right, the character is backed into the corner in the library, and the antagonist has the gun pointed at their head or whatever, but they bump into a shelf and the drawer opens and there happens to be a gun in there, and now we can shoot it. Well, we don't want that gun to be convenient, right? So earlier in the story, we made a little bit of a, had a little bit of a notice of this gun in the drawer. And so now it's like, oh, but we forgot about it over the course of the whole story. But we will remember, like, aha, that's right. The gun was in the drawer, and it feels satisfying and good, not just out of nowhere, but it requires you to go and do some more thinking and make sure you're setting up what you need in order to have a great logical way to get the character out of the conflict that you've created. So in the book that I mentioned before, or at the beginning of this podcast reading, I have finished it, and the author did something interesting, which was they had the character have a bit of a reflective moment in that she realized that if she had just had a conversation, essentially, she didn't say it in this way, but if she had just had a conversation and allowed this guy to explain what happened, if she had just talked to him, then they could have been happy for 7 years and she wouldn't have had to be avoiding him and blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So of course there was a happily ever after ending. And I think that little moment of self-reflection that the author wrote in for the character may have been a little bit of a nod by the author to the readers. It's like, okay, I know that this was an unnecessary puffed up conflict, right? And I think that this author also tried to make it part of the character as well of Caroline Bingley. Just kind of tried to tie that into her character and things like that. And overall, I enjoyed the book. And as I mentioned before, because it was a relatively short book, having that be the main engine of the conflict, of them just not having the necessary conversation, wasn't as frustrating and egregious because she didn't make me sit with it for a long time. But I do think that moving forward, I like to see, I won't say you need to do this, but I like to see conflict that is actually conflict, not just, we just need to have a conversation and we'll be able to see eye to eye because we're both reasonable people. It may be that, for example, maybe one of the characters, depending on how you set up the character development, their personality, their flaws, and strengths and all that kind of stuff. Maybe one of the characters is like, let's have this conversation. Let me talk to you. And maybe the other one either is like, no, which that's frustrating. But if they do have the conversation, that other character is still refusing to see reason. And that's kind of frustrating. But if you set that up in their character as a flaw, it's like, okay, well, at least we tried to have the conversation and now it is a flaw of one of the characters that is driving this conflict, but they know the truth now. And now the question is, what are they going to do with the truth? Now that, of course, can still become something that's annoying and unnecessary and frustrating if you drag it on. And of course, it depends on what the main plot of the story is. But at least that, it's like, okay, we've at least tried to have the conversation. It's not just that both people are not saying what needs to be said. And I really still think, even in that case, I still think there are stronger places that conflict can be found, even in a romance, other than the fact that the characters won't have a conversation, or they have the conversation and continue to just be really unreasonable about it. So in my parting thoughts to you, gentle listener, if you are writing something, especially a romance, I would beg of you to please see if you can identify other avenues of conflict besides just the characters not having a conversation. I believe that finding other stronger ways for the conflict to play out in your story will only make your story stronger. Stronger conflict, stronger story, right? And if you do decide to employ a little bit of not having a conversation as a conflict, I would beg you to not make it the focus of your whole 600-page magnum opus romance epic. Maybe it's just a small little touch. And if you add a really good reason around them not having that conversation, then it's like, okay, well, I can understand why they haven't had the conversation, then it's like, okay, well, I will give you some slack for that, but let's not lean on that, I think. And that's, again, my preference. This is my pet peeve. Thank you for hearing me out. It has been cathartic. Let me know in the comments, wherever you're listening to this, if it allows comments, which hopefully it does, what you think about this particular issue. Do you have issues with this? Do you not have issues with this? Is this your favorite type of conflict? If so, why? And if you're a writer, do you use this type of conflict? If so, why? And if not, why not? Anyway, talk to you later. Love you. Bye.